finally built myself a DIY pathway to my workshop and shed. Keep on watching if you want to see how I did it. Now, if you want to get technical, this project started a year ago just after building the summer house, and it was never going to be a video, but you can see we'd already removed the topsoil because it's a few inches deeper than the grass, and that all went into the raised bedding area for a veg patch. My husband was also convinced he'd put weed control down, and I wasn't sure during the build until this video edit when I saw this photo. But we'll cover that all later anyway. And we'd put maybe 6-inch deep of grit sand down and block paving temporarily that would hold back from extensions on the property. Fast forward to this year, I decided I wanted to combine the skills that I picked up during several landscaping video projects. I'll leave a library of videos below using various methods, and I'd opted for a path-edged walkway, stepping stones and gravel.
Oh, sorry.
And I started working out what width I wanted. I like to keep things simple, so I went for the same length as my spirit level, 1 metre, and positioned a few pavers for a dry lay before committing. This length also meant I'd avoid trees at the other end of the garden. Now to move them all out of the way, buckets in a wheelbarrow helped. I'll leave links to everything I use below, and I set myself little deadlines to stop me stopping for coffee and check Facebook. Now, before I set up string lines, I knew roughly where I wanted my first row of path edging to be, right in front of the summer house. And I used my 8-inch squared tamper as a digging reference because, first of all, it's 2 inches bigger than the pavers, which would allow me to fit the tamper in later when filling a trench with aggregate, and it would give me plenty of space either side to haunch it later and make them stronger. As for how deep I wanted to dig, you'll find various methods online and what you're going to fill it with depending on the traffic it'll get. So I taught you through how deep I dug. My block pavers were 2.5 inch thick. I wanted a 2 to 3 inch layer of MOT Type 1 sub-base, hardcore, and 1 inch for a layer of sand and cement mortar mix. This gave me a total of 5.5 to 6.5 inches, which I'd mark on an offcut to match the existing block paving and grass. But as my garden isn't level, I opted for the higher end to give me some play when levelling it out without having to reduce anything on my mortar bed. Anyway, if this is your first time digging, you might be surprised how much dirt you dig out, and you need to have a plan as to where you're going to put it. As this area was grit sand, I shoveled it into my wheelbarrow to reuse later. I also wetted and tampered it down as I went, and if I couldn't fit my tamper in, I knew I needed to shave a bit off on the sides. At this point, I didn't dig anything at the end of the garden to meet the 2 rows. The plan was to keep things simple and not need to have to cut any blocks, but I'll show you how I work that out later.
I'm absolutely shattered already. I've not even done a full trench yet.
Then to get ready to dig my second trench, I put a string line in 1 metre from the shed and thought I'd also check with my builder's square against the existing paving, but it just looked wrong against the shed as it tapered outwards towards the end of the garden. So I ended up setting my string line to match the shed instead. Thinking back though, it probably would have been better to make both rows square to the pavers, and any allowance would be hidden in a gravel border between the first row and the shed. But when I stepped back, I thought this looked all right. And one of my favourite sayings is, if it looks right, it is right. This string line will end up getting in the way anyway while I'm digging, or you could spray paint the line and remove it for now. But a metre away from the shed, this was definitely a mix of soil and grit. So I decided to get rid of it by topping up the garden beds again. And I'd constantly dampen the trench with a hose and more tampering.
Stop it.
I call this the tamper dance. For the sub-base, on my way home from somewhere, I popped into a local DIY store and found some £1 discounted 25kg bags because they were split. And I chose the option of getting them in bags because at the time I didn't realise I'd need a tonne eventually. I couldn't find a local quarry that sold and delivered to the general public, and I was worried about a lorry ruining our paving on the front garden while dropping anything off. But the key lesson for you all here is it ended up costing me 4 times more than if I'd ordered a tonne outright from a local quarry, which I did find later. And if you can't find anywhere local that has a nice display and delivers locally, just ask in a local Facebook group. I found where I wanted within minutes. So, wetting, tampering, topping up with more sub-base, and repeat. Let's just say I got a whole body workout and I was ready to put my feet up for the weekend.
Freaking weekend!
Okay, I'm back. What you've seen so far put together is me doing 2 solid days of work. And now I'm at the stage of making sure I have a sufficient depth to allow for a 1-inch deep mortar bed. And to copy the existing block paving slope, I got started on my string line. I positioned 5 centimetres away from the shed, using a square rested against it. Then got working on adjusting the height of the string line using a string level.
Hello, you can give me some support. Can't get the staff.
I'm not a pro, but this cheap little thing gave me so much more confidence, so I would absolutely get one of these. Also, I made sure mine was nice and tight so it didn't bow in the middle, otherwise I'd need another stake in between. And after placing a few blocks here and there, again a bit like a dry lay, I could then randomly check the line height to see if I had any high or low spots, and correct it anywhere needed, and more wetting and tampering. And I know dry lays can be very time consuming, but it paid off to do this on both sides, because at this point I realised both rows ended up finishing bang on perfectly. So immediately I thought, I'm having some of that. So I dug another small trench, filled it with subbase like the others, and found 3 blocks fit perfectly in between. And this was all down to having a good selection. Now, one of the negative things about me and my husband working from home now is that we're not using both vehicles anymore, and our van's battery was flat, and my dad's cement mixer wouldn't fit in my car, and I wanted to get the job done. And instead of mixing in a wheelbarrow this time, I don't like the shovel catching on the bolts inside, I decided to mix my mortar in this £20 mixing tray. And I was quite excited to use it actually. And I decided to mix a 5-to-1 mortar cement ratio. I could have opted for a stronger 4-to-1 mix, which would also set quicker, but I wanted to slow it down to give me some tinkering time, because I haven't done anything like this really for years. And luckily the weather was in my favour because it was 3 degrees and rising. First I'd mix it dry until it was all the same colour, make a well in the centre, a bit like when you're making pasta if you've ever done that, pour water in the middle and slowly incorporate it in the mix. By the way, I wouldn't do this without wearing goggles and thick gloves, and if it were a really windy day or I was in a confined space, I'd also wear a dust mask. Oh, and knee pads, because there's no way I wanted to be kneeling in mortar mix and then burning my knees. And I'd add a bit of water at a time because I'd have more control then, and I didn't want it to be too sloppy where the pavers would sink. I'd also been warned that a semi-dry mix, no water added, was also harder to get your bricks level. But as I said, it's been a few years since I've laid a patio, so I started with a small mix initially to get the feel of things, and it took about 10 minutes to mix each batch. I'd add a good dollop as a mortar bed, where each block was about 1 inch above the string line, and got it level with the existing pavers, and used a rubber mallet and a spirit level to match the existing pavers. But I also loved using this boat level to get them perfectly flat. I also had to make sure that my pavers didn't touch the string line, which would then knock it out of line. And that batch only lasted about 4 pavers, so from there on I decided to double my mixture. Honestly, if it wasn't for listening to good music and pretending my shovel was a guitar or a mic, I'd probably be bored stupid. Another thing that you've got to get used to is 1 minute you're freezing, the next minute you can't take your jacket off quick enough. And after a third of the way through the first row, I went back to the start and used the excess mortar as haunching with a trowel and pressed some gravel onto it so it'd blend in. And if you're wondering, yes, this is the same gravel that I'll be topping it up properly. But to save me any aggro, I only laid 3/4 of this row in case I came into any trouble when laying the final section at the back that meets the 2. To give you an idea of timings and planning your own path if you're doing this on your own, I'd been working on this for 3 hours and then I was able to start on the second row. But with that first one in situ, I could rest my spirit level on and make sure both were the same heights. Although sometimes the soil would get in the way, so I'd use an offcut of structural timber to raise it off the ground and check again. And as it got darker, don't you just love shorter days? I used my workshop's light before calling it a day. And we're mixing again. And I'm probably tired right now. At a guess, and I didn't count it to be honest, I probably had to make 10 mixes overall. And for the whole project, including the slabs, I roughly used about a tonne of grit sand and 3 bags of cement. For that back section, I decided to work on this all at the same time in case I need to do any shimmying. I was happy about anything ever so slightly out, but not massively where it would look wrong from afar. And luckily I was able to take the easy route by avoiding getting my circular saw with a diamond blade out, because I had a selection of blocks in different sizes. but this took a lot of fine tuning to get it level from all 4 points. And relax. Oh no, wait, there's another job. More hunching and more gravel. So let's talk pavers. I ended up going for 14 smaller staggered stepping stones. Again, another dry lay of me checking how deep the mortar bed was. But this is where I wasn't sure if weed control really was down under here. So I thought, while I'm here, it didn't really hurt to shovel it into a wheelbarrow. And laid some down and put some of the sand back on and wet and tamper it again. Now, if this path was going to have a lot of traffic on here, it's just me and my husband and dog occasionally walking on it to get into the workshop or shed for gardening, then I probably would have dug the whole lot out and filled the lot with sub-base, just like the path edging trenches. I just thought this was overkill for such light use. Although I did have some spare, so I just tampered it in with the rest anyway. And when it came to laying the slabs, I was worried I was going to lose a lot of time here measuring their positions constantly. So instead, I did a bit of maths to work out an equal space for each one. And I ripped some timber down to those measurements and nail gunned them together to make a couple of L-shaped jigs.
Hopefully that works.
And this way I didn't have to mess about with any more string lines. And while I'm here, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Still for sponsoring this project. Although I'm not here to talk about my favourite Bluetooth ear defenders, it's this guy, the GTA 26 battery-powered garden pruner. With its compact size, it's really easy to carry and store while doing garden maintenance. Now it might look tiny, but don't underestimate the 4-inch blade. Still claims it trims branches of up to 4 centimetres diameter, but when I helped my brother prune his unruly cherry tree last year, I was able to cut larger ones of up to 12 centimetres by chipping away at some branches from both sides. It also comes in a collapsible carry case with one battery, a charger, oil and a removable chain scabbard to cover the blade. And if you want to free up your hands between tasks, they also sell a part steel lined holster which attaches to your belt and leg. And when you're done, clean-up is really simple, although still do recommend wearing gloves for this. Just unscrew the knob to get access, brush any debris away, and you can also tighten the chain's tension by pulling out the guide bar to reduce any slack while retightening the knob. So if you have any gardening jobs on your list this spring, then I'll leave a link to Still stockists below. And I didn't really need 2 jigs, but that first step I decided to be 11 centimetres away from the block paving, not 10 like the rest. But this time for my mortar bed, I decided to go for a stronger mix of 4:1, and I'd get the pavers as level as I could with the path edgings because these had an uneven texture to them. And haunched each one and added gravel. But after the first 2, I realised that I could afford a lot more sand to the path because the mortar bed was turning out to be more like 2-inch thick. And although they worked out okay, there was a risk of them sinking while they set, and I'd end up having to spend a lot more energy on mixing sand and cement. So after filling it and tampering again, I just really zoomed through it, and I'd reverse the jig, bed a mortar, add a slab, make it level from every angle, double check the position with the jig again in case it moved, then haunch gravel and repeat. And when I returned the next day, I gave everyone strict instructions, including the dog, to not walk on them until they'd fully cured. I've heard from references that should be about 3 days really. So I'm tiptoeing around them while carefully topping up the gravel and tidied up the bottom of the shed by screwing some lap panels there as a kickboard. In fact, we didn't actually walk on the pavers until a week later, so it gave plenty of time for it to set. And by this point I'd scrubbed the pavers clean, left it to dry because I don't want to stain them, and brushed in a dry mix of 50-50 soft silver sand and cement between the pavers gaps, which I left to settle over the next few days. And £300 later, much better. And if you still want to look for some more garden patio projects, then make sure to check out my playlist over here.